right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for virtually, I guess, attending this workshop. We're going to talk about some resume tips, how to format a resume, what information you should include on your resume. So hopefully you have a little more success in the future when you're looking for jobs. All right, so what is a resume? A resume is a document that itemizes everything about you. So your education, different qualifications, and other accomplishments for any potential employers. So it's going to place focus on the highlights and relevant points for a specific position, but it doesn't necessarily include all of your information. So let's say you are somebody who is a little older, maybe you did some work as an independent contractor, so you have, several jobs that you could list. You are only going to list the ones that best fit the job that you're applying to now. So these are made up of 5 basic parts as well. So that's contact information, introduction, educational history, work history, and relevant skills. So how do I write a resume? The first step to writing a resume is making sure you understand what is on the job listing. So you're going to want to read the entire job description, top to bottom. What skills, education, and work experience are required for this position? So what does it require a college degree? Does it require a diploma or a GED equivalent? And then what skills, education, and work experience are preferred for this position? So you might have seen certain job listings before, might say high school diploma required, college degree preferred. So that means you don't necessarily have to have gone to college. They would just prefer that potential applicants have some sort of college background. So you're going to take inventory of your own skills, education, and work experience. Do you match those criteria? In what ways do you match those? Do you maybe have multiple degrees? Did you do a little bit of college? Maybe you didn't graduate. You're going to take note of all of that information and then consider how you might actually exceed the expectations of that position. So if I am somebody about to apply for a job and it says, well, high school diploma required, college degree preferred, I might actually exceed the expectations because I do have a college degree. And then you are going to think about the ways that you might actually not measure up to the preferred qualities. And that's okay. You can still apply for those jobs even if you don't have a college degree. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're just going to, toss your application. It just means that they would prefer applicants have some sort of college experience. So even if you don't measure up to preferred qualities, you might have done something similar that could still meet the mark. So let's say I graduated high school, so I meet the requirement. And I have also worked in this specific field for maybe, 5 or 6 years. So I have a lot of experience in this field. I may not have a formal education though. So your experience still might shift you ahead of other applicants. And then are there any education or work history equivalencies listed on the job posting? That's kind of what we just talked about. Maybe you have worked a specific job before, you have been, let's say, a teacher for years and years and years, even though you don't necessarily have a master's of education just yet. You got in before that was required. You would still probably be eligible for that position, and you should still absolutely apply for it. So let's talk about your information. So this is how you're going to fill in those blanks in the 5 different parts. So on a separate piece of paper, you can write this out by hand, or maybe you do it on a computer. You're going to list out contact information, your objective statement or introduction, your educational history, your work history, and then some relevant skills. So you are going to fill in the literal information beside the first, third, fourth, and fifth parts. You're going to leave that objective statement blank for just another minute. This does not have to be any, deep information, just list out everything you have. Try to put it in order of when it happened. So if you maybe had one job at employer A, then you went to a job at employer B, and then you went to a job at employer C, you want to make sure that you're noting when you started and ended your position at each place, and then put those in order the way that they would go. So then you're going to think about what additional information you can include for each piece. For example, your educational history should include your school name, the city and state, the date of attendance, and then whatever diploma degree you earned. All of this information will actually later go onto your resume. So if you maybe have to look up the zip code to a old college or your high school even, you can have time to do that. For work history, you should also include your position, the company, city and state, how long you've been there or were employed there. And then you're going to write up actually a list of the responsibilities that you had in that position. So you're going to take note of all that information and then think about maybe what you did in that job. So if I were hypothetically, let's say I worked at McDonald's and I was writing out my resume, I would say, I was in charge of making sure things were clean and hygienic. I was in charge of maybe counting down the register. I was in charge of health and safety criteria that I had to follow from the state or federal. I did this, that, and the other. Worked in customer service, have a lot of experience working with people. Just break down each and every piece of your previous position and talk about what you were actually in charge of doing in that job. So then we will move to contact information and your objective statement. So your contact information should include obviously your personal phone number, email address if you have one, and then typically your physical address. This does not mean that a potential employer is going to come to your house for any reason. That's basically just to make sure you are somebody who is local to that employer. So if I were somebody in like Nevada applying for a job here in Kentucky, they could say, oh, she lives in Nevada. Let's go ahead and toss that out. And then as far as email address, I know some people still do not have one. I really highly recommend creating an email address. That's something that we can totally help you with if you want to swing by here at the Powell County Public Library. Those are important now for your job search because that's where you're going to do a lot of correspondence with potential employers. So then we will talk about your objective statement. So that is basically a brief personal ad at the top of your resume where you're going to outline your goal in applying for the position. And you're usually going to refer to yourself in the third person. I know that's kind of odd. You want to avoid I statements in your objective. Think of this as you've created a product and you're standing in front of a line of investors and you're really trying to sell your product. But then think of yourself as the product. So you really want to hype yourself up. The example I have listed here says a highly organized and hardworking individual looking for a responsible position to gain practical experience. So if I were a potential employer, I was reading that, I would say, okay, so this person is highly organized, hardworking, and they think that this position that I've listed is, a responsible position that can give them some practical experience. So I got all of that information just from one sentence. And then here at the bottom, I do want to note it is important that your objective statement is brief, but it should successfully pitch your resume to hiring officials. There is an old statistic out there that says hiring officials spend probably 10 to 15 seconds actually looking at your resume, which is kind of unfortunate if you spend a lot of time on it. So you definitely don't want to write them a novel. You want to keep it really short and sweet and to the point. but also effective enough that they really get what you're going for here. All right. So as far as education and work history, your education section should be organized from the most recent event backward. So if you currently have a job, that would be the very first, or if you're currently enrolled in school, that would be the very, very first piece of your education section. So I would say, my name is Jane Doe. I'm currently attending Eastern Kentucky University. Here's the degree program I'm in, and this is my potential graduation date. So if you have completed your last level of education, make sure you put the date of graduation. If you're currently enrolled, just say I started like August 2015 to present. I would just say present because I'm presently enrolled. If maybe you took a couple classes somewhere and you decided to drop out, that's something that you wouldn't necessarily need to put on your resume, unless the specific classes you took are super, super relevant to the job you're applying for. If you also have completed any additional certification, you should definitely include that here as well. Does not have to be a completed degree or diploma or anything like that. If you are in any way certified, you can include that information here. So your work history section should also be organized like that. So you're going to talk about maybe your current job or your most recent job, and then work backwards in time. That gives your potential employer a good timeline, maybe how long you stay at jobs, what kind of jobs you've had most recently. And you should also include your volunteer or any other, substantial unpaid work here. When I say substantial, I mean something that you have probably done repeatedly. So if you, mowed your neighbor's yard once or twice, not something you would necessarily need to put on your resume. But if you led some kind of initiative and, mowed for elderly people in the community, you could totally put that on there, and that would look, great for a potential employer. All right, so as far as skills and references, think about what kind of responsibilities you had in your previous education or career. What skills did you obtain from that? And you really, I feel like this is the part that most people have trouble with, because it's not it's not super normal to really hype yourself up like you should. Maybe some of the skills that you obtain from these different periods maybe you don't have those, in your head all the time. But some examples of those would be like time management, record keeping, clerical tasks, proficiency with computer programs is super important, etc. So if I were maybe a college student at some point, I would say, that gave me some time management skills. I'll throw that on there. If I had worked in some sort of office setting, I might say that, I'm good with clerical tasks, and then I'm proficient with Microsoft Office. You don't have to qualify these at all. You don't have to give, a backstory to how you obtain these skills. You just have to list those. No commentary necessary. Now, if you were to get an interview, a potential employer might ask you how you obtained that skill, and you could, say, well, I worked in an office for a few years, got really familiar with, typical office equipment, and that's where I have most of that experience. So the skills section would typically be the end of your resume, so that's the very bottom of the page. I do still want to talk about references. So you should always have a list of at least 3 references available for potential employers to contact. When I say references, I mean professional references. It is super important that these are at least mostly professional references, and not family members or friends. Now, You know, we live in a small town, so it's totally normal to have maybe been employed at your uncle or cousin's business at some point, and that would be totally fine. But you definitely don't want a potential employer to call your mother and ask her, you know, about your work ethic or anything like that. So your previous supervisors, coworkers, clients, regular customers, etc., would all make super great references. So how do you format a resume? Microsoft Word actually has a lot of built-in templates for writing resumes, and they're not super complicated to use, really good for just general applications. Over here on the right is an example that I found of an actual Word template. You might notice that it is not organized in the order that we spoke about the 5 main pieces of a resume, and this is totally fine. Resumes don't have to all be organized the same. The 5 major parts are basically just the information that will be on the resume. Sometimes education comes before professional experience. Sometimes skills are a part of professional experience, but all of that information will always be there in some form or fashion. So when you are formatting your resume, you should definitely consider the position you're actually applying for. So if I were applying for maybe an office position, I would make sure that my resume looks super professional, kind of like our example here on the right. Maybe if I were applying for some kind of artistic or graphic design position, I might make it a little more different than others. So you want to really, really, really try to avoid going over 1 page. Like I said, that old statistic, employers usually don't spend more than a few seconds on your resume, so you definitely don't want them to have to flip to the other side or flip to the next page. You want to keep it concise, but make sure you really hype yourself up and make sure you have all of that information there. The next part is super, super, super big. So you want to proofread very carefully for typos, spelling, and grammatical errors. That is one of the that's one of the major things that might knock you out of a position, is misspelling a word or having some kind of grammatical error. While it may be, you know, an honest mistake, you could be completely, you know, grammatically correct in every other facet of your life. That one misplaced comma might knock you out of this job. You're also going to use some simple or plain fonts. So Times New Roman is a pretty safe option. Arial is also pretty good, and you're going to make sure those are sized only from 10 to 12. I'm not sure if I had mentioned this previously, but when we're talking about resumes, it is very, very important that they are typed and not handwritten. This is because, you know, some people's handwriting isn't super legible. And it also looks a little more professional, so you present yourself a little bit better. You also would want to use traditional bullets, which if you were to be on Microsoft Word, that's just the click of a button can give you the little circle bullet, so it's not a huge deal. So here are some quick tips that maybe don't warrant their own section, but I do want to make you aware of. So you are always going to submit your resume with a cover letter, even if the job listing does not require one. I say that because your cover letter is really your opportunity to qualify all that information that you included in your resume. You can really, you know, have that opportunity to hype yourself up even more. And it also shows that you're super interested in the job itself. So if I were a hiring official and somebody went out of their way to send me a cover letter, I might be a little more inclined to pay attention. Your resume should also be tailored to fit each and every job that you apply for. You never should submit the same resume twice, unless you're just starting out, freshly graduated or just out of college. You really want to make sure that the information on your resume is really tailored to the job that you're applying for. If the position you're applying for is located far away and you're okay with that, you know, you're willing to move to Nevada or wherever else, you're going to make sure that you include that you are willing to relocate in that objective statement. That shows the potential employer that you are aware, number one, that the job is, you know, far away from you and that you are looking to move to that area anyway. So next we will say focus on the employer's needs in a new hire and how you meet those needs. You don't necessarily, again, want to include every bit of education or every work experience you've ever had. You want to make sure that you are tailoring your resume to how you could best serve in this potential position. And again, you do not have to include every single job you have ever had. Include the ones that are most relevant to what you're applying for without leaving a time gap. So let's say I worked at place A, then place B, then place C. But then place A and C are the only ones that are super relevant to the job I'm applying for. But if I were to leave out B, there would be maybe a 2-year gap where it looks like I might have been unemployed. You should still include job B, just so you don't have to explain that, you know, you left something out of your resume. If you are unemployed, which, you know, it is very normal right now in the times that we're facing, you can be very honest about that. You can say, you know, I was laid off at the beginning of this pandemic, haven't been able to really find anything, all in the interview when you're actually asked about it. So it's not something to sweat too much. All right, and finally, where could you possibly go in Powell County for more help in writing your resume? You can hit us up Monday through Friday, or Monday through Saturday now, I guess, since we've returned back to in-person programming. We have so many folks here who would love to help you write your resume, really organize your information. So yeah, come and see us if you need any additional help. If you had additional questions about your resume, you can always reach out to me, Kenndra, at KMARTIN@PCPL.org. And